Welcome to Only in America. I'm Ali Noorani. This week, American Identity, my conversation with the Detroit City Councilor who unites the city's diverse communities.
I think sometimes being a brown person in America or having a more kind of mixed hybrid identity freaks people out because they can't draw these very clear boundaries about who you are or where to put you in because they see themselves in you. And I think that's really why the browning of America scares people, because it challenges who they are in their whole identity.
And American values, are they changing under President Trump?
The big issue for me, where I see a fundamental betrayal of our values, is immigration. And I look at what this administration has done and the way it has almost declared war on not just undocumented migration, but on legal migration.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America. Family unity is an integral American value, and as immigrant families continue to be divided by officers from ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the examples are racking up. 3 stories just this week, which represent only the tip of the iceberg. A Michigan mother with no criminal record was deported to Albania without being offered the opportunity to say goodbye to her 3 children or her husband. A Wisconsin father of 2 with no criminal record was deported to West Africa, leaving behind his pregnant wife and 2 children. He hasn't been there in 20 years. And a single mother of 4 American-born children with no criminal record, who fled violence in Guatemala 24 years ago, is living in a church in Connecticut to avoid deportation. Separating families is not just bad policy, it's an affront to the ideals on which America was built, which raises an important question for all of us. Is this the America we want for our children? John Feely quit as the U.S. ambassador to Panama last January. This week, he told CNN's Don Lemon that he resigned because President Trump's understanding of American values is different to his.
When white supremacists march with tiki torches in the United States, the first thing any responsible leader does is to condemn them. I studied, like every other American, the civil rights movement here in the United States, and I thought that we had made so much progress, obviously with a lot more progress to be made, but it just seemed like when he did not condemn those white supremacists, those neo-Nazis, those folks screaming, "Jews, you will not replace me," that we had surrendered the moral high ground. And one more thing. I was an ambassador. An ambassador is the president's personal representative. It's more than just somebody who is working in the bureaucracy, someone who has to be disciplined. We are all disciplined. I swore an oath to faithfully and completely execute the president's foreign policy. And it was on that day where I just realized, no, I can't do it any further. And so the big issue for me, where I see a fundamental betrayal of our values, is immigration. And I look at what this administration has done on our policy and the way it has almost declared war on not just undocumented migration, but on legal migration. The temporary protected status decision a couple of weeks ago that takes people who've been here for 10, 15, 20 years, living, working with legal status in the community, Central Americans, Haitians, legal status, ties to the community, and now says, well, sorry, time for you to go back. That's just fundamentally not American. I work with a group down here called Impact the Immigration, and when I say down here, I'm in Miami tonight, the Immigration Partnership and Coalition. We did a mentoring event tonight, and there was a young fella who was one of the speakers, 24-year-old, from Nicaragua, came here just 10 years ago under one of these protected status programs. He was 14 years old when he came here, couldn't speak a word of English. You know what he's doing today, Don? He's in AmeriCorps. He is teaching in an inner city Miami school. When the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, says these people don't speak English, they don't assimilate, I fundamentally disagree with that.
Meanwhile, up on the Hill, one of the immigration bills under discussion is Congressman Bob Goodlatte's hardline plan, called the Securing America's Future Act. This bill will be framed as a solution for DACA recipients. Don't be fooled. It isn't a solution for anything. Goodlatte's bill includes a paltry 3-year temporary visa for existing DACA recipients. a 40% cut to legal immigration, mandatory e-verify, and tougher interior and border enforcement measures. At this point, the bill only has 96 co-sponsors, well short of the 218 votes it will need to pass. But it is a number that may grow as Trump ratchets up pressure in the coming weeks. Speaking of the president, on Wednesday, President Trump participated in an immigration roundtable in Long Island, where the harmful and destructive rhetoric only continued.
The laws are horrible. There's not much you can do beyond what we're doing. We're down on immigration, crossing the borders more than 40%. We were actually down 77%. Our economy is doing so well, people are coming across the border. The economy it's one bad thing about having a great economy, frankly. But the economy is doing so well that people are crossing the border. In many cases, they're crossing for reasons of good, but in many cases, they're crossing for reasons of really, really bad.
Meanwhile, Republican Jeff Denham from California and his merry band of discharge petitioners are working to craft bipartisan legislation that permanently protects dreamers and improves border security. How the White House responds remains to be seen. They have a tendency to be, a little negative when it comes to compromise. Politically, this couldn't come at a worse time for many Republicans. As of yesterday, 21 House Republicans have signed the discharge petition. 9 of these members are from districts whose Hispanic populations exceed 18%. And in June, when all of this may come to a head, 9 states, including California, Colorado, and Nevada, will be holding their congressional primary elections. It seems the voters are going to have their say on what exactly are American values these days. I'm Ali Noorani.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
This is Only in America from the National Immigration Forum. Sometimes I get to talk to someone who restores my faith in politics. Meet Raquel Castaneda-Lopez, American-born and a lifelong Detroiter, who made history by becoming the first Latina elected to the Detroit City Council. 5 years on, she is in the trenches of city government, working to improve the lives of all Detroiters. She serves as vice chair of the Finance Committee and as liaison to the Detroit Public Schools. Growing up in a poor, multiracial neighborhood, the councilwoman is a champion of social justice. I met Raquel through Sayu Bojwani, the founder and CEO of New American Leaders. She trains new Americans to run for office all across the country. Raquel's father was born in Mexico, and we had a lot of fun chatting as she told me how she variously described herself as brown or mixed origin. She says her looks have led to both acceptance and surprising challenges.
The part of the city I grew up in is known as Southwest Detroit, and has always been like the home where immigrants settled, whether they were Polish or Hungarian or Romanian, Albanian. Those really were the most immigrants back in the day, like the 1920s and 30s, when everyone was coming up to work in the automobile industry. Now the demographics have shifted and much more heavily Latino, mostly Mexican, where I live more like second, third, fourth generations. And now in the past decade or so, you see more folks from the Caribbean, Central America, Latin America. So it's always been kind of like this mixing pot. I remember there being like Filipino families and Vietnamese families and Russian families and such. So having that kind of diverse community definitely impacted me and who I am today. And I think is one of the reasons I really enjoy working a more pan-ethnic approach to things and not just with one individual community. But then leaving that neighborhood, I was always in the minority. I mean, I remember being in third grade and switching schools to another neighborhood and being asked if I was Black or I was white or I was mixed. And of course, I was in third grade and I didn't really understand those differences. And I thought, okay, mixed kind of sounds like Mexican. I think I've heard that. I guess I'm mixed. That makes sense. You know, I have siblings that look really pale. I have siblings that look really dark. My dad gets mistaken for being, mixed Black. Sometimes maybe we're just all mixed. So it was like, okay, I'm mixed. And so I very much as a child identify with being a minority, being a member of the African American community, all knowing something was like, I wasn't 100%, but that was the population I grew up with, and all my friends and everybody I knew, I was the only Latina person besides my brother or one other student. So I remember in middle school learning about the civil rights and having very strong education around African American history and culture. And that really was what I identified with. And then kind of high school, switched to a very wealthy suburban school, which was much more predominantly white, and still being identified just as a person of color from the city of Detroit, which we didn't have a very good reputation, and as being poor. So it was more like, I'm from Detroit, I'm from poor, and these are the more prominent identities. And so and that was the question, was like, what city are you from? Not what ethnicity was, what city you're from. And then in college, really interesting, I went to school in Montana, University of Montana, and there are very few, not that diverse at all, very few Latinos, very few African Americans, very few Asians, just not that diverse. The largest population, actually, minority students were Native Americans. So I remember being on campus like within the first couple of days, and they had like the welcome to school barbecue, and a young woman approaching me and sitting down and just saying hi and introducing herself. And then she asked me what tribe I was from, and I paused and I really thought about it, and I was like, what tribe am I from? I think Mayan, because my family's kind of from central southern Mexico, so let's say Mayan because that's what I think we're probably descended from. They're a great civilization. So I said Mayan, and the response was like, oh yeah, that's really cool. I'm from this tribe, I'm from that tribe. And I felt like immediately embraced into the North American Native community, and which was always a part of my identity and history that I was always searching for. I knew that we have indigenous ancestors on both sides of my family, but because of how colonization played out in Mexico and much of the Americas, you can't track. Like I can't track beyond 3 generations. So oftentimes people are like, well, you're Mexican, you should be proud of where you're from. And I always feel like there's this gap in my identity. Like, yes, I know my dad's from Mexico and my grandmother's kind of from Mexico, but I know that we have indigenous ancestors that were erased, and I can't trace that beyond several generations. So it was something I always was searching for growing up with my Latino indigenous identity and how that fit into things. So yeah, long story of my different facets of learning about my identity and always kind of being in the minority in some way in whatever group I was a part of.
That's really, really interesting. I'm just trying to think of that map, right? And the line that kind of going up and down and all around across the continent. So how has that journey of identity shaped who you are today?
I really appreciate the struggle of it. I mean, there's definitely moments in my childhood and even as an adult that are really, really painful, but also helped me to really be, I think, more compassionate and empathetic to other people's struggles, and to really feel comfortable what I call code shifting in between different groups and different populations. I mean, as an elected official now, and I go out door knocking and talk to residents. And when I was first running for office in 2013, one of the senior citizens I met said something to me that I still remember to this day and rings very true. I was door knocking and she invited me in, and we were chatting, and she kind of said, you're going to win, and you're going to win because you're brown. And Black people identify with you because you're a minority person and you're not white. And white people identify with you because you're not Black. But at the same time, you are going to be hated and rejected by both because you don't fit in either category. And I didn't understand the profoundness of her wisdom she had just dropped on me at that time. I was a little bit shocked and taken aback. And I was like, oh my goodness. But it's really rung true in so many settings, is that a lot of marginalized communities will say things to me or feel like they identify with me because I am a minority woman. And then other communities, but I'm not necessarily part of their community, right? So there's some level of distance and rejection. And even within the Latino community, because I talk very educated and Spanish is my second language. And I look very kind of stereotypically Mexican, so to speak. They joke and say I have the cap just on my forehead because I look so stereotypically like Mexican. So having all these different identities imposed on you, and also having people feel a certain level of freedom and comfort with you, as if they can identify with you. I often feel like I'm code switching between different worlds and have this kind of almost hybrid identity that is a blessing, and really I think has given me a lot of wisdom and insight and made me stronger and really appreciate that diversity and those perspectives, but also makes it really challenging because you're always kind of on the outside, never fully in a part of a certain community. And so that guides everything that I do on city council and just on a daily basis, of really working to make sure that people feel valued and that people feel included and that their unique perspectives are a part of the narrative versus being cut out. And then also moving away from all the silos. We're so siloed. And I think sometimes being a brown person in America or having a more kind of mixed hybrid identity freaks people out because they can't like draw these very clear boundaries about who you are or where to put you in, because they see themselves in you. And I think that's really why the browning of America scares people, because it challenges who they are in their whole identity, and the boundaries aren't as clear, so to speak. So yeah, that's very much been my experience, and I appreciate it despite the challenges of it.
Yeah, so it kind of makes people more comfortable, but also a little more uncomfortable because, like you said, you're both one of, but not. So what led you to run for office?
I was actually recruited to run for office. So back in 2013, I'm a social worker by trade. I was working at a local university. I'm a first generation college student. So I was working with a lot of first generation college students, kind of giving back in a way that, I never had somebody do that for me. And I loved my job. And then the city of Detroit went to a council by districts versus having 9 at-large members. Voters decided to switch to 7 districts and 2 at-large. And I volunteered on that campaign to get it passed, but never ever thought about running for office. And slowly it was just neighbors I played soccer with, or people I had worked with at a nonprofit, or whatever it is, people I'd waitress with. They were like, "Hey, Raquel, have you thought about running for council?" And I was like, no, never in my life as a social worker. I was like, I'm not going to cross to the dark side, never. I just never envisioned myself in that way. And then also there was a lot of self-doubt. I mean, I grew up in poverty. I still to this day live in my childhood home, which needs a lot of repairs. And I'm third eldest of 8. And my siblings, although whereas my dad didn't have food and my mom, they really struggled to have stable housing, and they were technically homeless at times. We had food and we had housing. We still struggled in different ways. So I never thought this little, less than 5 feet tall, a woman from the neighborhood who still lives in her ghetto childhood house, never ever thought that I had the potential or the power or the skill set to be in an elected position. So that was a lot of my fear and concern about running for office. But so many people came out of the woodwork. It literally was like maybe 10 to 2 weeks prior to submitting signatures to get your name on the ballot. And people came out of the woodwork to collect signatures for me. And we got more than we needed to get my name on the ballot. And so I went to go turn them in to the city clerk's office just as a way to honor them and thank all these people for believing in me. But I was like, I can't do this. And the woman at the clerk's office kind of looked at me, and she knew I was afraid because I asked for the form to take my name off of the ballot.
You worked with people to gather signatures, you turn in the signatures, and you're so worried and afraid that you, at the same moment, ask for the form to take your name off the ballot.
She looked at me and she was like, "Look, honey, you're just afraid. And you have to get over it, because this isn't about you. This is about the community and all of these people that believe in you and want you to serve and represent them." And I really felt called out, like she just checked me. But I appreciated it because I was like, that's true. I mean, and so I very much felt called to serve and called to be in this role. And I had to get to a point, though, where I really owned my choice. During my first term, I really still struggled with a lot of self-doubt. Even after I won, I was like, okay, I won. I did it, guys. Woohoo. I'm going to resign. We did it, but I don't really need to be in this role. And so it was a lot of self-reflection, a lot of just meditation, in all honesty, and practicing mindfulness to believe in myself and believe that I had the skill set and ability. And in the back of my mind, when people first started asking me, I had a gut reaction and I knew that I could do it. But that thought in of itself and the power that I felt I had scared me even more. And so getting to a point where I owned my choice and deciding to run, and I owned my own power and potential and valued my voice at the city council table has been a long, long journey. But I'm very grateful to the people who encouraged me to run, and grateful to all the people who believed in me and still continue to support me to this day.
In your first term of office, was there a moment when you thought, okay, this was worth it?
Yeah, it's funny. So within maybe the first 6 months, we have a Cinco de Mayo parade. This year, unfortunately, the first time ever, there was a young man that was killed. There was a disagreement and someone pulled out a gun and the young man was shot right along the parade route. There was a vigil held days later, and the media, unfortunately, was like, they were Latino young men, and they said it was gang activity, this typical stereotypical response oftentimes of the media and communities of colors, like these are, men that were involved in gangs. And that wasn't the case. And so I went to the vigil to support the family, and the media came. And at this point, I was terrified of talking in the media. I would run away anytime I saw the news and I really did not do any media interviews. So I was there with family and we were holding hands and singing and such and praying. And then the news came over and they really wanted to talk to the mom and to the girlfriend, of course, right? Like you want to get their stories. I remember the community was like, no, we don't want to talk to you right now. And the media was like, well, we really want to interview the family. And then the other woman said, no, you can talk to Raquel. And they're like, well, we want to talk to the family. And the woman said, Raquel is our family and she speaks for us. And I remember getting goosebumps and feeling like the chills and being kind of frozen in the moment and feeling so honored and humble. And then kind of like the lioness comes out, right? And, you know, we're always taught to protect my family, take care of my sisters, et cetera, et cetera. So that gut reaction kicked in and it was like, get across the street right now, media, like leave these people alone. You want to talk to someone, you can talk to me. And so it was like an amazing, scary, like super empowering moment. But I will never forget that because I felt so humbled and so blessed that they trusted me. And definitely felt like, you know, wow, it's amazing that I can be in this role and advocate and protect on behalf of people in my neighborhood that I grew up with or that I knew. And that was really, really just an amazing experience to be in. And a whole host of other ones. But that was something I clearly remember from my first 6 months being in office of how important it is to have people who identify and look like us and have experiences like us in those positions, really just for safety and protection.
A scary first 6 months, but quite a moment to turn that corner.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think every day is a learning experience and reaffirms, although I still doubt myself, there's definitely still moments where I go into rooms where it's all older attorneys and I'm like, who am I again, this silly little social worker in this space? But to remind myself that my voice has value and my story has value and I deserve to be at the table. And I think often of my niece who's 16 years old, who when I decided to run, she was like, can we do that? Like, we're poor. Like, is that something we can do? And wanting her to never have that doubt again. And I think of my mom who grew up in the projects on the West Side, who was very fearful when I decided to run and actually didn't talk to me for several months because she was angry. She's like, how dare you put our business out there and how dare you like do this? But slowly came around and volunteered on election day and did the robocall and was out at the polls like cheering. And so I draw courage from my family and draw courage from previous generations and from folks in the neighborhood and remind myself of who I'm fighting for and why I ultimately decide to become a social worker and decide to enter the field of service. So no one should feel devalued and no one should feel powerless and voiceless. And kind of repeating that to myself when I go into these spaces gives me courage and reminds me of why it's important that I'm there.
What are you looking to accomplish for the district that you represent in the coming years?
It's pretty diverse. And for me, it's really important to honor that diversity because there's a lot of racial tension and conflict that still exists. I have some of the poorest neighborhoods and some of the richest neighborhoods, some of the neighborhoods experiencing the most development and other neighborhoods that have 20 plus blighted properties on a street. So it's just such a district of contrast. And so for me, it's really about making sure every Detroiter has a voice and that their voice is valued and shifting the paradigm and framework around how we do development and how we do housing and how we do community outreach. I think a lot of major cities around the country and the world, kind of post-industrial, focus on building up downtown and the core and such. And Detroit is so huge. It's so big. We can fit like Boston, downtown Manhattan, and San Francisco all within the boundaries of the city. So it's huge. So how do we kind of redefine urban development in a way that doesn't displace poor people, doesn't displace immigrants, doesn't displace people of color? And that really is a challenge because from New York to San Francisco to Chicago, amazing cities, a lot of folks can no longer afford to live there. And so I think our opportunity and challenge as a district, having downtown and having some of the poorer communities, is to really figure out how do we keep equity and access at the forefront and create affordable housing that really allows people to stay and create development projects that are inclusive of the immigrant voices and the low-income voices and the market rate voices in a way that's different than other cities have done. And so for me, I chair the Immigration Task Force. One initiative is really about building a welcoming city that's inclusive to all, both new arrivals as well as people who have been here for a long time. And that plays out in the immigrant community and the tension that exists sometimes between high-skilled and low-skilled workers, first generation versus people fourth generation, as well as with native-born non-immigrant Detroiters. It's really the tension between white young suburbanites and people tend to be older African-American folks. And how do you create a city that's really welcoming to all of those different populations? And that's what I work to do on a daily basis. A lot of mediation, a lot of conflict resolution. I think I'm grateful that I grew up in a large family because I think it really helped me hone those skills that I now use daily. But yeah, it's a continual battle every single day. Shifting paradigms is no easy work, and really changing the framework of how local government operates is obviously, you know, something that's going to take lifetimes. But I'm honored to be in this space and honored to be at the table fighting for those things.
That is just spectacular. Thank you. Thank you so much, Counselor. And I have one last request of you. And the name of the podcast is Only in America. So my last request of you is to finish the sentence, only in America, ...
Only in America could a short brown girl get elected and still live in her childhood home.
Raquel Castaneda-Lopez was the first Latina elected to the Detroit City Council. There are resources links to her work at our new website, immigrationforum.org. And while you're there, why not subscribe to the show or check out our archives? Speaking of archives, I'm away next week, so our next episode will include some of the best interviews we've aired from around the country on Only in America. Our show is produced by Emily Chow and Regina Medina. The executive producer is Kathleen Farrell. Talk to you again soon. I'm Aline Narani.